I called my wife while I was on the road, another work trip, driving away from my routine, away from our home in New Jersey. Fatigue dominated me, the longing for her enveloped me like a heavy blanket. On the other end of the line, the sweet, familiar voice welcomed me, at least until I heard something I shouldn't have. "Hi, love, I just wanted to hear from you, know how you are," I said, trying to hide the weight of the distance. She responded, as always, in a soft and seemingly happy voice. But there was something different that night. A hesitation, a space between words. The kind of silence that screams, that leaves questions floating in the air. And then, I listened. It was low, barely audible, but it was there, a laugh. A masculine laugh. One breath. The doubt immediately turned into a chill down my spine, my heart stopped, and before I could even process it, dread consumed me. "Who's there with you?" My voice was sharp, more like a knife than a question. The silence that followed was deafening. On the other side, I heard the muffled sound of someone moving away, and then, she tried to control her tone, but it was too late. "Yeah, it's just the TV, it's on here," she replied too quickly, too defensively. But I knew. The weight of that strange laughter still echoed in my ears, like a whisper that couldn't be erased. The world around me seemed to shrink as I held the phone tight, trying to stay calm, trying not to explode. What else was she hiding? Who was she with? Why, on such an ordinary night, did she look so different? Doubt became despair, despair became obsession. I was alone on that road, without anyone to turn to, without knowing who to trust. Every kilometer I drove seemed to take me further away from the reality I knew. And the memories started coming back, flashes of moments I never questioned, details that now seemed distorted, wrong. Were all those nights working late lies? The distracted smiles, the hasty excuses for not going out together, her cell phone always facing down. All of this came together like pieces of a macabre puzzle, revealing a truth that I wasn't prepared to face. When I arrived at the hotel, my body was shaking. I called her again, perhaps hoping that this time it would be different, that I was wrong. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, and it was all just unfounded paranoia. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But even I could hear the tension in my own voice. She hesitated. I'm home, of course," she said. "I love you, you know." The words came out cold, empty, as if they were coming from a mouth that no longer belonged to me. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine his face, but all I saw was darkness. All I heard was that damn laugh, that whisper that seemed to mock me. I tried to push away the anguish, I tried to find some logic that would give me peace. But peace had long since left. My mind could only fixate on one thing: who was she with when I called? What was she doing while I poured my love into her, while I blindly trusted her voice? And then the decision came. I needed to know. I needed to discover the truth, even if it destroyed me. It was no longer a question of trust, it was a question of emotional survival. I decided that I would go home, that I would face everything head-on, that I would find out what had happened in the shadows of our life together. At that moment, I didn't know if it was love or hate that guided me. Maybe it was a little of both. One thing I knew, nothing would be the same again. Something inside me was dying, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to resurrect it. I grabbed my things and left that hotel, leaving behind what seemed like the last night of a life I thought I knew. The trip back was long, and every second felt like another blow to my mind. Her words echoed in my head, mixing with my memories, with my shattered dreams. When I got home, the silence was almost deafening. I opened the door slowly, hoping to find some clue, some evidence of the betrayal that I already knew was there, even without seeing it. What I found changed everything. It revealed secrets that I would never have imagined, truths that had been hidden before my eyes for so long. She was there, of course, but in a way I had never seen before. And, by his side, the shadow of a man I would never forget. What happened that night, what I discovered, turned my pain into something more. Something I didn't expect. Something that would make me wish I had never come home. And this is just the beginning of a story where love and betrayal go hand in hand, where choices made in the heat of the moment have lifelong consequences. What reveals itself in the darkness is just the prelude to an emotional battle no one would ever hope to face. But after all, how did everything get to this point? How did a marriage that seemed perfect become a web of lies, forbidden desires and secrets that could destroy everything they had built together? And what would I do when the truth finally came out, when the world came crashing down around me? What happened in that house that night was just the beginning of a storm that would change our lives forever. Welcome to our channel. Here, betrayal will never be supported or glorified. Our stories are fictional, created to show the harsh reality. Betrayal destroys lives, breaks hearts and leaves scars that never fade. Get ready, because what you are going to hear now is a shocking story, full of twists and turns. Enjoy it, if you can. Nick and Amanda's story began like so many others. They met at university, a chance encounter at a campus party that turned into a long conversation late into the night. Amanda had an infectious smile and a natural lightness that made everyone around her feel at ease. Nick was more introspective, one of those guys who only opened up after a lot of insistence, but with a sarcastic sense of humor that attracted Amanda. From the start, they were an unlikely couple. She, the free soul who loved spontaneity in new adventures; he was methodical, cautious, someone who needed a list for everything. But somehow they fit together. Or at least that's what it seemed like. After 5 years together and 2 years married, Nick and Amanda had the kind of comfortable routine that so many couples crave. They lived in a charming, 2-story house, surrounded by a garden that Amanda cared for as if they were the only plants in the world. Each flower had its exact place, each petal had a meaning. For Nick, these little quirks of Amanda's were charming, an expression of her desire to see beauty in everything. He watched her from the office he set up in the house. From there, he could see the garden and the joy on her face as she took care of the flowers, always smiling. Nick was a sales manager for an insurance company, the kind of guy who followed right and wrong, someone who liked to be in control, who planned every step. Amanda, on the other hand, was an artist. She made a living from freelance work as a photographer and, sometimes, dedicated entire weeks to painting, her greatest passion. His paintings were scattered around the house, carrying strong colors, raw emotions and an intensity that seemed, in some way, to reflect his personality. They balanced each other. She made him smile more, relax. He brought her back down to earth when her ideas became too grand to be realistic. In everyone's eyes, they were a perfect couple. They had friends in common, they went out to dinner on the weekends, they shared a life of complicity and friendship. But, as in every relationship, there were shadows that no one could see. Nick's job required him to travel frequently, entire weeks away from home, crossing different cities to close contracts. Amanda was alone, and during these periods, the silence in the house seemed to swallow her energy, her creativity. She tried to paint, but the canvases remained empty, the brushes stopped. It was as if, without Nick around, a part of her was traveling too. When he returned, the reunion was always a mixture of longing and discomfort. The longing turned into long kisses, intense nights and that genuine joy of seeing each other again. But soon after, discomfort came, as if, in these separate days, something changed. Nick arrived with stories of his days away, always with a tired smile and a gift he bought during the trip. And Amanda tried hard to listen to him, to be part of that world she didn't know. She tried to smile, tried to find the happiness of having him back, but something always seemed out of place. He noticed this hesitation, but didn't know how to deal with it. Amanda spent hours staring at her blank screens, as if searching for something she had lost. When Nick was away, she would go for walks around the city, taking her camera to capture photos, trying to find inspiration around every corner. In fact, she was trying to fill the emptiness she felt. And then, when he came back, she tried to forget that feeling, immersing herself in their routine, believing that it was just a phase, that one day it would end. Nick had his insecurities too, but he never shared them. For him, being the provider, the protective husband, meant keeping these doubts to himself. He wondered, during his travels, if Amanda was really happy. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't understand, a gleam that seemed different every time he came back. As if she were distant, or as if she was hiding something. But he always brushed these thoughts aside, placing them in the category of normal marriage insecurities. One day, during one of his business trips, Nick ran into an old college friend. They sat in a bar, talking about the old times, about the future. "And how is Amanda?" asked the friend, casually. Nick smiled, taking a sip of his beer. "She looks great, she's painting more than ever." And as he spoke, a shadow crossed his gaze. His friend's simple question hit him like a wave of reality: how was Amanda really doing? He realized that, although he knew about her paintings, about her work as a photographer, he didn't really know how she was doing. "I didn't know what made her happy or what worried her lately." And this doubt accompanied him for the rest of the trip. Back at the house, Nick arrived later than expected. Amanda was waiting for him in the living room, her welcoming smile and a tight hug, as usual. "I missed you," she said, kissing him. And he believed. He believed because he wanted to believe, because there was nothing safer for him than the love he thought they had. The days passed, and the routine returned to normal, dinners together, laughter during comedy movies, each other's comforting presence. But the signs were there, hidden in the details, in the unspoken words, in the moments when Amanda seemed distant. On quiet nights, while she painted in silence and he worked in the study, the sound of the house was filled with an almost deafening calm. A calm that hid the whirlwind of emotions that they both tried to avoid. When Amanda received messages on her cell phone, she always turned the screen down, saying it was just work. Nick never questioned. He was a trustworthy man, always believing that things would work themselves out. But that laugh he heard on that call, that laugh wouldn't leave his head. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Nick immersed himself in work, in his endless travels, while Amanda retreated more and more into her own world. They were still making plans for the future, still talking about having children, about the possibility of traveling together to places she wanted to photograph. But there was something broken that neither of them could fix, and they both knew it, even if they didn't say it out loud. And so, with each passing day, the void between them seemed to grow, like a silent abyss that they refused to acknowledge. Each gesture of affection was an attempt to get closer, to recover something that was escaping. But at the same time, they were empty gestures, words thrown to the wind, as if they both knew there was something bigger, something that a simple "I love you" couldn't solve. It was a game of appearances, a constant effort to maintain normality, to hold together the ends of a marriage that, little by little, was falling apart without them realizing it, or perhaps, without them wanting to admit it. And so, they continued, day after day, pretending that everything was fine, that love was still enough to hold back the invisible cracks that were growing, until the inevitable moment when the truth would be impossible to ignore. The days continued to pass and the discomfort between Nick and Amanda grew like a shadow they couldn't avoid. Every detail seemed filled with a veiled tension, the touch of Amanda's fingers on the cell phone that never seemed to let go of her hand, the nights when, despite being at her husband's side, she seemed absent, with her head far away, perhaps somewhere Nick had never been invited to enter. And his trips, more and more frequent, longer and longer, left space for that void between them to grow and take over everything. There were questions hanging in the air that Nick didn't dare ask, and Amanda didn't feel ready to answer. Nick began to withdraw into his own silence. He felt that his wife was hiding something, something he didn't know how to reach. When traveling, loneliness seemed to suffocate him, and when he tried to distract himself, suspicions gained more strength. One night, after another exhausting day of work, he tried to call Amanda. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail, which was unusual. Tried again, and nothing. Nick's heart sped up, and he could feel cold sweat starting to cover his hands. He tried to convince himself that there was a logical explanation, maybe he was sleeping, maybe the phone was on silent, but the anxiety wouldn't leave him alone. After half an hour, Amanda returned the call. "Hi, love, sorry, I was in the shower," she said, her voice soft, without traces of any problem. Nick tried to relax, but something about her response didn't seem right. And then he heard it, a male voice in the background, muffled. Laughing. It was quick, maybe Amanda hadn't even noticed, but for Nick it was like a punch in the stomach. "Who's there with you?" he asked immediately, trying to keep his voice steady. The silence on the other end of the line seemed to last an eternity. "No one," Amanda replied, with a tone of surprise that Nick knew was fake. "It's just the TV, there's a silly movie showing here, nothing big." She looked irritated, as if his question had been an attack. And so, the discomfort was pushed under the rug once again. But the doubt, that remained. The next morning, Nick decided to return home earlier than planned. He wanted to see her, he wanted to make sure that everything was okay, that laughter was just a figment of his imagination. He drove for hours, without stopping, trying to get his thoughts in order, trying to prepare himself for what he would find when he arrived. He thought about how he would approach her, how he would say he missed her, how he would try to understand what was happening without seeming paranoid. When he reached his street, he saw something that made his heart stop, a car parked in front of the house. It wasn't Amanda's car, much less someone she knew. Nick stopped the car on the other side of the street, his eyes fixed on the house, the strange vehicle, the possible scenarios playing out in his mind. There were lights on inside the house. And then he saw, a silhouette in the window. An indistinct male figure walking through the room. Nick closed his eyes for a second, taking deep breaths, trying to calm himself. But the anger and pain had already taken over. He got out of the car, trying to remain calm. He walked towards the front door, with determined steps, but his heart hammering in his chest. "I didn't know what I expected to find, but I was already sure of what was happening." As he reached the door, he heard laughter. A familiar laugh, yes, but now it seemed distant, strange, as if it belonged to someone else. He took a deep breath, his hand on the doorknob, and then he opened the door at once, without warning, without knocking. What he saw made the ground disappear beneath his feet. Amanda was there, in the middle of the room, laughing at something the man next to her had said. She held a glass of wine, and her expression was one of pure joy, the kind of joy he hadn't seen in a long time. When she noticed Nick's presence, the glass fell from her hand, shattering on the floor. The laughter died on her lips, and the shocked expression made her pale. Nick stared at Amanda, his gaze burning with pain, anger, betrayal. What is this?" he managed to stammer, pointing at the man, who was now as still as a statue, trying to understand what was happening. Amanda didn't respond. His mouth opened, but no words came out. She tried to get closer to Nick, but he took a step back, as if her simple touch was unbearable. "What is he doing here? Who is this?" Nick asked, his voice louder than he intended. And then, he realized that the answer didn't matter. Because he knew, deep down, what it meant. He knew his life would never be the same. Nick felt like the world was falling apart around him. The room was empty of words, but filled with a silence filled with pain, anger and disbelief. Amanda remained static, still trying to process Nick's unexpected presence, while the man next to her, a stranger to Nick, seemed to want to disappear into the wall. It was as if time had stopped, leaving everyone trapped in a nightmare that no one knew how to wake up from. Finally, Amanda broke the silence. "Nick. I can explain." His voice trembled, each word came out heavy and lifeless. She couldn't look at him, and Nick's eyes burned, waiting for something, anything that would justify what he was seeing. But there was no justification. All he felt was a mix of despair and fury, conflicting emotions fighting for space inside him. Explain what? Who is he, Amanda? What's going on here? Nick's voice was shaking, but it was firm. He didn't scream, but each word was a blade, cutting through the air, cutting through Amanda herself. She tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away, as if her simple touch was unbearable, something unclean. The pain in his eyes was clear, but there was also a determination there, a determination to find the truth, to know what had happened while he was gone, trying to keep their marriage alive. The man next to Amanda shifted, trying to adjust the collar of his shirt as if it were suddenly too tight. He was taller than Nick, with a relaxed, almost arrogant posture. He tried to say something, but Amanda interrupted him, almost in despair. Nick, please, please don't do that here. Can we talk? Can we go somewhere else? There were tears in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and regret. But Nick didn't want to wait any longer. I didn't want to hear any more explanations. Talk. This sounds perfect. Tell me now, Amanda. Tell me what's going on and why this man is in our house. Nick looked at the man, who looked away, uncomfortable, as if he were there by accident, as if it were just an unfortunate mistake. But Nick knew none of it was a mistake. Amanda started to speak, but her words were disjointed. She tried to explain, but the truth was stuck in her throat, as if admitting it would tear something inside her. He's just a friend. A friend who came to visit me. There's nothing going on, I swear. But Nick's eyes didn't look away, and he knew the lie was laid bare before him. Her every word sounded empty, every excuse seemed to fall into a bottomless pit. Friend? And this is how you welcome your friends? With wine, laughter, and hidden from the person you've shared your life with for the last 5 years? Nick stepped closer, his voice a dangerous whisper. He knew that if he spoke any louder, if he let his anger escape, it would be impossible to take it back. Why didn't you tell me he would be here? Why didn't you say anything, Amanda? I deserved it. Amanda, now sobbing, covered her face with her hands, and the man next to her finally spoke. Maybe I'd better go. His voice was low, almost regretful. He knew he was in the middle of something really big, and he was already starting to regret getting involved with Amanda. She nodded, unable to look at either of them. Yes, you better go. It shouldn't have happened like this. The man got up and walked past Nick, who was looking at him with a look of contempt and pure anger. For a moment, he thought about doing something, holding the man back, demanding answers. But all he could do was watch as he left, leaving just him and Amanda alone in that abyss of silence and betrayal. The door closed, and then came the confrontation Amanda was trying to avoid. How long, Amanda? Nick finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, confused. How long have you been with him? How long have you lied to me? Tell me the truth, for once. She tried to calm down, but guilt was written in every line of her face. He knew that lying again would only make things worse, but the truth was just as painful. A few months ago, he admitted, barely audible. But it doesn't mean anything, Nick. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I was just confused, I was alone, and you were always traveling. I felt lost. Her words were like a dagger to Nick. A few months. Amanda, I was here. I tried. I tried to be the best husband I could be. I did everything for us. And you betrayed me. You brought another man into our house, into our bed. He stopped, voice cracking under the weight of emotions. It was as if everything he knew, everything he believed in, was falling apart. Amanda moved closer, trying to touch Nick once again. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. I love you, Nick. I know I made a mistake, I know this is all wrong, but I want to make it right. I want us to go back to the way we were before. Forgive me, please. But it was too late. The tears that ran down Nick's face were of anger, of despair. He never imagined that the woman he loved would be capable of something like this. He never imagined that the person he trusted most would betray him like this, and now, the entire life they built together seemed like a lie. He walked away, feeling like he needed to get out of there, like the air was becoming impossible to breathe. No. You don't love me, Amanda. You loved the idea of what we were, but not me. I was an idiot for not seeing that sooner. Nick turned to leave, grabbing his car keys and ignoring Amanda's screams asking him to stay, for them to talk, that everything could be resolved. But for him, there was nothing left to be resolved. The betrayal had been exposed, and now there was only emptiness. A void that seemed impossible to fill. Nick left the house, closing the door behind him, leaving Amanda to collapse in tears on the living room floor. And as he drove aimlessly, feeling the adrenaline still burning through his veins, he knew that that night would change everything. He knew there was no going back, that something inside him had broken forever. But little did he know that the betrayal he had just discovered was just the surface of an even darker secret. And as painful as that truth was, it was about to reveal an even deeper wound, a revelation that would change their lives forever. Nick drove for hours that night. Anger and hurt pulsed inside him like a wave that came and went, an unrelenting storm. The images of Amanda, laughing and drinking next to another man, replayed in his mind like a damn movie. He parked the car in a lakeside park, a few miles away from home, and simply stood there, staring into space. The questions burned: how could she do this? How could someone who claimed to love betray you so coldly? The silence of the park seemed to amplify the pain he felt, and for a long time he just lay there, alone, trying to understand how his life had gotten to this point. He thought about the days when they were in love, the smiles they shared, the complicity he believed they had. It was difficult to accept that all of that had turned into ashes. But the betrayal was there, naked, in all its ugliness. The trust had been shattered, and what was left now was just a feeling of emptiness, as if he were adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Nick finally decided to return home when dawn was beginning to appear on the horizon. He had no idea what he would do from now on. The marriage seemed to have been irreparably destroyed, and the thought of facing Amanda again was unbearable. But he knew he needed to face her, he needed to understand what would drive the woman he loved to betray him in such a cruel way. He wasn't sure what to say or how to act, but he knew he needed answers. When he entered the house, he found Amanda sitting on the sofa, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She was wearing the same dress as the night before, but now she looked like a fragile version of herself, as if she were made of glass ready to shatter. "You're back," her voice was a faint whisper, full of uncertainty. Nick looked at her, his gaze hardened, distant. "I need to know the truth," he said bluntly. "All of it. Not just about him. Above all. How did we get to this point?" Amanda took a deep breath, and then began to speak. Each word seemed to take a piece out of her, but she knew there was no way to hide anything anymore. She talked about how she felt alone on the days when Nick was away, about the emptiness that came over her when he was traveling. She talked about her insecurities, about how she felt lost, as if a part of herself was disappearing. She said the case began as a distraction, an attempt to fill in something she herself couldn't understand. "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, as if that would erase all the pain. I just wanted to feel alive again. And he made me feel that way." Amanda's words were a sharp blade, cutting through what was left of Nick's heart. He listened to everything in silence, trying to absorb, trying to understand. But there was a part of him that couldn't accept it as a simple consequence of the distance or the time they spent apart. This was a choice, a deliberate betrayal. And no matter how much Amanda tried to justify it, he knew that nothing would ever fix what had been destroyed. "You don't understand," Nick said, shaking his head, his eyes teary. "You say you were alone, that you were lost. But what about me? And everything I did for both of us? Every time I tried to make you happy. What was all this for you? Just an excuse to do what you did? Amanda tried to respond, but her words died in her throat. She knew there was no justification, that nothing she said now would change the truth that had been exposed. And, for a moment, they both sat there, immersed in silence, as if they were two strangers who no longer knew how to communicate. Finally, Nick stood up, shoulders heavy, head bowed. He was exhausted, and all he wanted was to escape that situation, that house that now seemed strange, suffocating. I'm going out for a while, he said, avoiding looking into her eyes. I need space. I need to think. Amanda didn't try to stop him. She knew he needed to go, that he might never come back. The days that followed were full of uncertainty. Nick rented a hotel room, unable to return home. He spent entire days sitting, looking at the ceiling, trying to understand his new reality. He alternated between wanting to confront Amanda and wanting to simply forget that it all happened. But something bothered him deeply, as if there was still something he didn't know, something hidden beneath the surface. Amanda, in turn, was lost. She tried calling Nick several times, but he never answered. She left messages, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain how she felt, but she knew he wouldn't hear them. The house was now an empty space, a prison that reminded her of her mistakes every second. The pictures on the walls seemed to mock her, reminding her of the happy days that would never come again. But there was something that Amanda didn't count on. Something she hid from Nick from the beginning. Something that, if revealed, would make the entire situation even more unbearable. And now, with Nick out of the house, Amanda knew it was time to face the truth. Nick, on the other hand, was about to find out for himself. Without Amanda by his side to stop him, he would start to notice things, to put together pieces that didn't make sense before. Little clues left behind, messages on her cell phone, strange contacts. And as he got closer to the truth, the revelation of the secret would be like a bomb, blowing up everything that was left of their lives together. What had Amanda hidden? And how would Nick react when he found out? The betrayal had already been revealed, but the true face of the story was about to emerge, a face no one could have ever predicted. Nick was determined to uncover the full truth about Amanda's betrayal. Even though he tried to keep his distance, something inside him wouldn't leave him alone. He knew there was something more, something Amanda hadn't told him. The days passed slowly, and the emptiness inside him only grew. The love he still felt for Amanda was there, lost somewhere in the midst of the anger and sadness, but covered by the cloak of doubt and distrust. One night, after a few weeks of living at the hotel, Nick decided to return to the house. He needed answers, he needed to confront Amanda and end that dark chapter of his life once and for all. When he arrived, the house was dark. Amanda was sitting on the same sofa, with her head buried in her hands, the shadow of a person who could no longer carry the weight of her own mistakes. She looked up when she heard Nick enter, and this time, there were no more excuses, no more tears. There was only the raw reality of what was left of their relationship. Nick, she began, but he interrupted her, his voice calm but firm. I just want to know the truth, Amanda. All of her. I feel like there's something you're still hiding. And I'm not leaving here until you tell me. She took a deep breath, and he could see there was something different about her that night. Something heavier, darker. Amanda knew she had nowhere else to run, that the only way to get out of that darkness was to tell everything. Even if the truth would destroy what was left of hope. I'll tell you everything, she said finally, lowering her head. But I need you to be prepared, because what you're going to hear will change everything. And then she started. She told how she met her lover, that he was not just someone she was having an affair with, but someone she was planning a new life with. He was young, charming, and made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just physical betrayal. She confessed that she had considered abandoning Nick, running away, starting over. The moments of solitude while Nick traveled were filled with messages exchanged with her lover, dreams of a new life, of a freedom that she thought she would never have with Nick. The secret Amanda hid, however, was the final blow. She revealed that, days before the night Nick discovered everything, she had given all the money from her savings to her lover, believing that together, they could build something. But, to her bitter surprise, he disappeared soon after taking the money. "He tricked me, Nick," she said, and the pain in her voice was so strong it sounded like she was choking. "I was used. And in the end, he just disappeared." Nick's expression was pure shock. Amanda had given everything to a man who didn't care about her, who deceived her with sweet words and false promises. "Did you give him our savings? Did you plan to run away, with another man?" Nick almost didn't recognize the voice coming out of his own mouth. The betrayal now seemed like something much bigger, more devastating than he had ever imagined. The lover was not just a distraction, but someone who stole their future. And now, there was no going back. Nick sat down, his head buried in his hands. Amanda's words echoed in his mind, and he could no longer see a way out of that situation. "You destroyed everything, Amanda," he said, in a barely audible whisper. "I wanted to hate you, I wanted to find some reason to justify what you did, but, you destroyed everything. There is nothing left to save." Amanda didn't try to justify herself. She knew that her actions had destroyed the marriage, that there was no forgiveness for what she did. But Nick's silence, the look of someone who has been torn apart, made her realize the depth of her betrayal. She tried to find something to say, something that could lessen the pain she saw in his eyes, but the words just wouldn't come. She realized, finally, that she had lost everything: Nick's love, her trust, the future they could have had together. Nick was silent for a long time. When he finally stood up, there was a determination in his eyes that Amanda didn't recognize. "I'm leaving for good, Amanda. I'll go back to get my things, but don't expect me to stay." His voice was firm, cold. He had already made his decision. The revelation of the secret had put a final shovel in the ground in that relationship. Amanda tried to follow him to the door, reaching for his hand one last time. But he walked away, and when the door closed, she knew that was the end. She sank to the floor, a bitter sob taking over her entire being. There was no going back for her. All she had was an empty house, a future that she herself destroyed. Weeks passed, and life took different paths for both of them. Nick filed for divorce and managed to recover part of the savings that Amanda had lost, thanks to the support of friends and family. Slowly, he began to rebuild his life, finding comfort in hobbies he had abandoned, meeting new people, and slowly finding joy in small, everyday things. Amanda, on the other hand, had to face loneliness and guilt. The nights were long, lonely, full of regret and emptiness. She started painting again, but her canvases were different now, they reflected the pain of her choices, the guilt she carried. She knew that her lover would not return, that she had been deceived, but this awareness did not bring comfort. It just made it clear that she had destroyed the only true relationship she had ever had. In the end, everyone moved forward in their own way. Nick freed himself from the bonds of a marriage based on lies, found the strength to move on and build something new. Amanda was left with the consequences of her choices, with the weight of knowing that, through her own mistakes, she had lost the person who loved her most. She had to face life alone, with the shadow of her past always following her. The betrayal had transformed both of their lives forever, leaving bitter lessons about love, trust and forgiveness. So, what did you think of this story? We want to know your opinion. Leave your comment and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, betrayal is never the answer, it destroys, hurts, and leaves marks that not even time can erase. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. Until the next story.